Teachers of Reddit. What's the most clever attempt from a student at giving a technically correct answer to a question you have seen? I was a police instructor, and when I asked a new trainee what's something you cannot do to an already handcuffed suspect, I expected, hit them or something. I called on a new trainee who was kind of shaky, and he blurted out, put your fingers in their mouth. He's not wrong. I was a teacher assistant, and one of the jobs I had was to correct homework. One student had misunderstood the assignment. It was one of those you have $10. What do you buy? And you pick and choose from items on the sheet. But this girl made her own stuff. So she drew a cartoon of milk and a cheese with what they cost, and the total was 10. It was beautiful made. So creative and must have taken 7 times longer to complete than if she had done it right. So I wanted to give her everything right and a freaking star, because this girl was a freaking champ. But no. The teacher made me give her wrong, and she then showed the whole class what wrongs she made and made her redo it. A small part of both mine and that girl's soul died that day. In my college English class in Japan, a professor had an open anything that isn't connected to the internet test. One student brought in American. I'm a teacher, but this story is from a friend. Also not a clever retort, just childish innocence. He was teaching a group of kinders about hand washing and germs. Teacher, where might we find bacteria? Child, enthusiastically, Wisconsin. I mean, he wasn't wrong. I asked students in an English class to write sentences to practice their understanding of different parts of speech. I think my instructions said to use words from our vocabulary list and at least one action verb per sentence or something like that. One kid wrote variations of the verb jumped over the adjective at recess. Not a teacher, but a friend of mine is. One time she gave a test on the book Great Expectations. The question asked something like, what were his expectations? One kid just answered, great. I had a teacher who would always have dumb extra credit questions. One was a true/false, where if it's false you cross out the word that makes it false and write in the correct word. This one was Mr. Teacher's favorite color is purple. Now, I figured false which was correct, but I didn't know what the color was and knew he was looking for us to change the color. I changed the name to someone whose favorite color was purple. He didn't give me the points. I'm still bitter. Not a teacher, but I will never forget this happening in a class. We were going around the classroom saying what we would wish for given 3 wishes. It was like the first week of class. The only rule was that you couldn't ask for more wishes. So it's going smooth. We are making it around the class. Then my buddy gives his 3. 1. No rules. 2. Infinite wishes. 3. The teacher was like wishing for more wishes was one of our rules, and with the most dead serious face imaginable he says, I wished for no rules, and that is not a rule. Everyone started laughing. To us it was the funniest thing all week. The teacher said in all the years they have asked that, not one student had ever wished for the rules to be removed so they could get more wishes. Was a good week. I teach English in Vietnam. The tests I give are usually verbal and made up from the school. I ask what their name is and listen to how they sound on one portion of the test. Then I ask them to spell it. I've been waiting for a long time for someone to do this, but someone finally responded with IT. I gave him extra credit on the paper. It doesn't mean anything, and made a comment about it on the test paper. This is one of the cool things about the school. They are encouraged to be creative. I was that student once. In high school physics our first lesson was that speed is relative. And our teacher held up a tennis ball or whatever and said he'd give a candy bar to anyone who could tell him how fast the ball was moving. We all obviously said it was standing still. To which he explained that the earth is spinning. So it's actually moving about 750 miles per hour or whatever it was. And on top of that the earth is rotating around the sun. The sun is moving as well. etc etc. So on our first test we had some real simple velocity based questions, so in my math I added 750 miles per hour or whatever it was, which made it a gigantic pain in the ass to grade. He gave me 100% on the agreement I wouldn't do it again. Back in middle school we were doing reading comprehension or whatever and determining if the given sentences were complete or not. and I pointed out that the minute Scott heard his name called was in fact a sentence about a very tiny guy named Scott hearing his name called, and had nothing to do with time. Was always proud of myself. Obviously I'm not a teacher. I was teaching gardening / ag at a magnet school in Kansas, and we were talking about composting worms, specifically red wrigglers. The class was probably 2nd grade, and I asked, "What do we know about worms?" to get the students thinking, and one little girl said very solemnly, "They don't have Bibles." This is true. Worms don't have Bibles. Not sure if it was clever or a misunderstanding, but I was a math teacher in a nation country. We had a quiz, and one question asked, "Define a linear relationship and give an example." One student wrote, "When a boy and a girl are friends and like each other. For example, my mom and dad." I guess that's right. We were handed a writing prompt on something like write a paragraph about what you think bravery is, and the kid next to me wrote no and turned it in within like 30 seconds. The teacher laughed and was impressed by it, so I tried to do the same. And she goes, "All you did was copy, insert name." So I said, "Yeah, it's pretty brave to cheat off someone." She said, "Don't confuse bravery with stupidity." I think my ego shrank a lot that day. This one's kind of on point. In the spirit of a student doing something technically correct, when I was having my 4th grade kiddos write a persuasive essay on a topic of their choice, one girl in my class, who despised writing essays, came to me asking if she really had to do it. In talking with her, I noticed she came up with reasons to support her point pretty easily, so I told her to write them down. When she did that, I said if she could make it look professional, that is, on essay paper, she wouldn't have to do it. At the end of the week she was all smiles as she turned it in. I was really impressed and proud of her work, and she earned a great grade. Upon getting it back with everyone else's essays, she sat quietly for a second, then looked at me and said with a goofy frown, "You got me to do it anyway." I just smiled and nodded. Yeah. So in the end I had 31 essays on where their family should travel, 18 on what they think is the best pet, 13 on why the school should start a recycling program, and 1 on why they shouldn't have to write a persuasive essay. Student obviously not paying attention. Joshua, what was the last word I said? Said. Calculus I, a problem asked a student to estimate the square root of a certain integer, I think it was 19, and to give an upper and lower bound. They were supposed to use linear approximation in the problem. One student wrote down that it was greater than 1 and less than a billion. In subsequent semester I said explicitly to use linear approximation. Obligatory, not a teacher. But I got a 10 out of 10 on a history final in high school when the essay question asked, "In your opinion, why and how was the North victorious over the South in the Civil War?" My first sentence started out, "In my opinion," and the teacher finally realized she had to give everyone an A who gave their opinion. She changed the test question before the next period's class came in. Once during freshman year of high school we had a test about To Kill a Mockingbird, and one of the questions was, "What is the significance behind Dill's name?" I wrote down, "Because he's always in a pickle," and got it right. Not a teacher, but in high school we had a National Guard rep come talk to us. He asked, "What does the National Guard do?" I shouted out, "Guard the nation." Ended up getting a shirt out of it. Somewhat related to this, but when I was in high school we had to do some essay exam about a book that I hadn't read. Instead of trying to bullcrap my answer, I wrote an essay about another book I had read instead. I expected to get an F, but was surprised when I got it back and it was a B. He told me that it was a good essay, even if it wasn't about the assigned book, but to not do that again. Not a teacher, but a parent. My son was being tested for the special needs program, and they were asking him some logic questions. They asked him what he does if he drops his fork on the ground, wanting/expecting him to say pick it up. Instead he said he would get a new fork because he didn't want to eat with a dirty one. They asked what he would do if he walked into a room and the light was off. Thinking he would say turn the light on, he said he would leave the room, because at that time he wasn't tall enough to reach the light switches. My other kid was in a story time circle at preschool, and they were reading a book about this kid. Who does crap he's not supposed to, and at one point the kid is splashing water out of the bathtub. The teacher asks what happens, and most of the kids say the kid gets in trouble. He makes a big mess, but my kid says the floor gets cleaned. Environmental science class. A test question said, where do most shark attacks occur? A student wrote, in the water. The answer was Neritic pelagic zone. The class was reviewing for a test on the American Revolution, and I was quizzing them about the Treaty of Paris. Great Britain signed the treaty with anybody? Jacob, he was daydreaming. Great Britain signed the treaty with, and Jacob said, a pen. Someone in my class had a pretty big argument with a teacher during German. We had to write a letter as a response to another letter, but most of the score was from grammar and syntax and a minimum number of words, and only like 10% was about the actual coherent response to the content. So one of my classmates realized this, and just verbatim answered the letter with the exact same letter, arguing that, since it contained no wrong grammar, and was perfect German, he should get all points except for content, while the teacher obviously considered it a massive perversion, and wanted to just give him 0 points. Not a teacher, but a former JROTC cadet inspecting younger cadets, to pass them for a promotion. In 2016. During the presidential election, one of the questions for our promotion board was to name a presidential candidate other than Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, or Bernie Sanders. I learned at the end of that day that only one kid got the other inspecting cadets to break their bearing with the answer of these nuts, because at the time, he was correct. I'm not a teacher, but I remember once in kindergarten, give or take a year, everyone had to take a test administered by the state to test intelligence, and one of the tests was to create a pattern with different colored pieces of paper. Everyone else was making 1:1 patterns like red blue. When it was my turn, I made an awkward pattern, and almost got it wrong, because the administrator didn't think I understood patterns at first, because I made one along the lines of red yellow red green red yellow red green. Don't remember exactly, I barely remember anything from that long ago, but I vividly remember that specific question on the test for some reason. I asked, what's the difference between a semicolon and a comma? A student didn't even take a beat before answering, a dot. Once on a stats test, one of the questions started with, is it possible for, and I wrote, anything is possible through God. And my teacher set up a one-on-one meeting to explain to me why she wasn't giving me credit, making sure I wasn't offended, and apologizing because I was technically correct. Personally, I don't believe in God, so it was a pretty funny outcome to me. When I was a kid in grade school, we'd be given a pair of words, and we had to name things that those two words had in similar. One example is apple and almond. What you were supposed to say was they're both food, but I always said things about the word themselves, such as, they both start with A. The teachers always marked it incorrect, and it made me so mad. If that's not what they wanted, they should have made their question more specific. My school went through a period where they decided to make everyone do writing prompts regularly. It was annoying and fairly pointless. So when presented with one such prompt, a friend of mine dutifully answered the question, but written upside down and backwards so that it could only be read in a mirror. I think he was suspended for the stunt. Not a teacher, but when I was in history class once, I got an extra credit question on a quiz on list 3 alternative names for World War I. I answered the Great War, the war to end all wars, and the war, figuring that every war is at first called the war before it's gone on long enough to get a proper name. The teacher decided to give me credit for that. One of my classmates was rather salty about it, since he had more realistic answers, but could only come up with 2. Was teaching English at elementary school in Japan years ago. Pretty basic stuff, fruit, animals, food, sports, etc. Playing a game with 4 teams. You had to draw a picture on the board, pass the chalk to the next person, repeat. You only got points for things that you could name in English at the end of the game. Bonus points for difficult words. Keep in mind the level here. Basic nouns for very basic things. Come up to one kid's pick, a rectangle with squiggles all over it. What is this? Picasso. Boom. In high school, for a chemistry final, we were able to bring in one 3x5 index card with notes for the test. Our teacher handed out written guidelines and this rule was included on the sheet. Fast forward to the day of the test, everyone is taking out their materials, and the kid sitting next to me unfolds a huge sheet of paper with basically every handout from the year stapled to it. Our teacher is like, "Yo, WTF is that, Steven?" And he whips out the test guideline sheet and says you didn't include units of measurement on the 3x5 index card. So Steven had constructed a 3 foot by 5 foot cheat sheet. Now keep in mind that this is chemistry and units are quite important, to the point of having points docked for forgetting them. Our teacher had a minor meltdown at her omission, realizing she would have to let him use it as his sheet technically fit the guidelines. I'm assuming he did well. Not a teacher, but I had a Heath education class that I didn't take seriously at all, so I gave stupid answers to questions. The one I'm most proud of was the question, "What does HIV do to the body?" And I made a poorly drawn picture of the AIDS gang beating up the immune system and I drew herpes and the common cold waiting on the sideline with a bat. This was the only question on the test I answered. Not a teacher, but in 4th grade I was told to say what fraction of the circle was shaded. The circle was split into fourths, 2 of which shaded. I answered 1/2 of the circle was shaded, while the teacher wanted 2/4. I wasn't given credit and was told I was incorrect. Later the teacher pulled me aside for confusing the other students. I was a teacher a while back, but this was when I was a student. My English teacher passed out a quiz on Heart of Darkness, something my entire class agreed she never assigned. The questions were really easy if you had read the book. Nothing about analyzing for symbolism or speaking about its themes, just comprehension. Problem was, I hadn't read it, and neither had anyone else. One question read, "What did character have in front of his house?" To which I responded, "A charming picket fence." I got credit for that question. The answer is actually that he had the heads of his slaughtered enemies on stakes. So, charming picket fence. Obligatory. Not a teacher, but my elementary science teacher had an exercise that was meant to teach students the value of writing clear procedures by asking every kid in the class to write her instructions for how to make a butter and jelly sandwich. As she collected papers, she tried to return one kid's paper and then seemed to change her mind. She took the papers to the front of the classroom and proceeds to misinterpret each kid's set of instructions, ultimately not making a correct sandwich. Finally, she gets to the kid whose paper she tried to return. It turned out that the kid had beaten her at her own game. The kid's instructions spelled out a perfectly clear instructions for a butter and jelly sandwich between 2 sticks of butter. The teacher had never said that a sandwich had to have bread. In hindsight, the activity was an enormous waste of food. French 1 test. Question: what is a contraction? Correct answer: a combination of 2 words to make one shorter word. Do not, don't. A plus le, aux. Student given answer: something a woman has when she is about to have a baby. Sorry miss, I know I studied but I forgot. I gave her 1/3 points. Student: can I use the bathroom? Teacher: I don't know. Can you? Student: I don't know. I haven't tried yet. Obligatory. Not teacher, but student. My English teacher from 11th and 12th grades was super chill to the point where I almost failed my exam. She would basically accept any answer as long as it was close enough. My friends and I had fun coming up with weird interpretations of the poems she gave us, especially when she gave us the Emily Pinenson packet. Years ago in grade school, I had this student who thought he was so clever. On exams, he would answer questions such as what does an apple and an almond have in common by saying both start with the letter A. The correct answer is they are both a type of food. The other teachers and I would always get a good laugh in the staff room, though. Not a teacher, but when I was an almond, they used to ask kids what I had in common with an apple, and this one kid kept saying it was the letter A. We are both foods. Answering for my teacher here, that time she said Japan didn't really have colonies before Korea and I pointed out that they owned Port Arthur, Ryukyu, and Formosa at the time. She told me to stop being annoying and shut up. Not a teacher, but first week of high school senior year we had to stand up and say our names and something about ourselves. I stood up, Said my name as I clean toilets, and I'm an alcoholic. Teacher didn't find it as funny as everyone else. I'm not a teacher, but in that one Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, where Mrs. Wormwood asks what state do we live in, and Calvin answers with denial, is pretty good. Not a teacher. One time in first grade we were given a paper with 6 lighthouses drawn onto it. We were told to color in half of the lighthouses. I colored in one half of each lighthouse. I mean, the almonds thing. Was a student. The first little project in first year campsy involved sorting some numbers. I heard the prof was going to ask how many if statements did you use, and the target was 6 if you're clued, or 5 if you're advanced. I was proud that I used 0. For maybe 7 minutes. I was a legend. I was the student in this scenario. In high school we were watching a short film / documentary about soldiers landing on a beach during WWII. I can't remember why, but I was sent out of the class to stand in the hallway for 5 minutes because I was being disruptive. When I was allowed back into class, the teacher paused the video almost immediately and asked, "What do you think those men saw as they were running onto the beach?" I immediately raised my hand, and when I was called upon I responded, "Cameraman." I was sent to the dean's office for the remainder of that class. This is Guam, which, like a lot of Pacific islands introduced to Western diets, has an obesity problem. My friend taught visiting Korean students English at the local university. She asked them to come into class with something that represented Guam culture. One of the kids brought a pamphlet on diabetes. A student in my class couldn't remember the date when the Netherlands became a democracy in a history exam. So he went on to explain for 2 pages why the Netherlands still isn't fully democratic, because the king still has influence on government. He got half the points. Not a teacher. Not that clever. When I took sociology, the professor sent us home with questions that were to be answered handwritten on half sheets of paper. Once there was a question about gender in retail stores, something like, when in Walmart is there differentiation between products based on gender? Can you tell just by looking that these products are meant for a gender? How? So I had a friend who used the front and the back and talked about color and masculinity / femininity in marketing. She got a 3/5. I just wrote yes, because there are signs. She ended up a little bit angry when I then argued with professor, who changed my grade to a 5/5 because I was technically correct. When I was an assistant, I was walking around the room helping kids with maths, and one of the kids had completed all the work set within 5 minutes. I went to go check and mark his work. The kid realized that with algebra the letter has to be defined, so he wrote answer equals x. The answer is x. The 3 dots mean therefore. I made him do the actual maths. Grade to review before science quiz. Q. What are the 3 states of water? A. Florida, Texas, California. Kidlet thought I said what are 3 states near water. This is impressive, because going to school in Canada I really don't know how a 6-year-old knew 3 states near water. Dumb, because we just did a unit full of experiments about the 3 states of water. I've had students argue for partial credit on a multiple choice exam when all of the above was the correct answer, but they did not choose it. The reasoning is that the answer they chose is still correct. My counter arguments are: 1. Instructions say choose the best possible answer. 2. 0.25 points is going to round down anyway. And 3. There's no partial credit on a multiple choice test. Had a teacher who told us about a philosophy final he had in college. Prof put a chair in front of the class and he asked, "Does this chair exist? Why or why not?" The only person who got an A on the final wrote down what chair. My neighbor is a physics teacher. She asked a student once what would happen if he jumped out of an airplane and there was no air pressure. His response was to ask how the plane got up there. This is never gonna make it past the bottom level of comments, but I have to share. This was actually some dumb survey our college was making all the classes take. It was a literature course, and it was supposed to tie into the values of the college and our personal lives or whatever. Our French professor was hella mad, cause they sprung it on the second to last week of classes, and it was supposed to take the entire hour and a half, and she had mapped out every hour of the semester. So she says, "Well, we have to spend the entire class reflecting on how the literature you read in this course has affected your daily life. and how it makes you a better and more enlightened person, or whatever. And if you don't do it, then I get in trouble. But they never said what language it had to be in. So we all wrote our multi-page responses in French. On a test, the question was, what is another word for trust? It was poorly worded, and was my first year teaching. The correct answer was monopoly. But one kid from the country of Georgia just wrote the Georgian word for trust. He wasn't wrong. Not a teacher, but I was at a promotion board for the army, and a question I was asked by a first sergeant from another company was, where should you not place a tourniquet? He was expecting me to give the correct answer, directly on the wound. Yet I replied, around the neck. First sergeant had an autistic kid who was very clear about her comfort zones. She got this question in her math book. What would you do if you had $5 at the amusement park? Go home. This answer at the same time spoke volumes about her, but it's also so relatable. Still cracks me up whenever I'm feeling down. 10th grade biology. The teacher asked what is one way to get rid of a gene, and me being a dumbass said genocide. In 8th grade, my math teacher told me that 0 divided by 0 was both everything and nothing, so I naturally started using it whenever I didn't know the answer. Never got points, but he did chuckle. Zoot zoot, not a teacher, but when I was in elementary school we had these vocab assignments where we had to make up a sentence using the new words. I always wanted to be somewhat creative with them, but one time I couldn't think of a good one for excitement. I was thinking to myself, what's a sentence using excitement? Bingo. Ended up just writing that down and switching it up for the rest of the assignments. The teacher pretty cool about it until all my friends started doing it. Then she called my parents and my dad was pissed. Not a teacher, but I remember once in class we had to calculate the distance from one state to Michigan, and I was the only person to ask which Michigan mitten or pointing finger. I mean, you get a different answer depending on which you used, and the question didn't specify a city. At the end of a test in English we had to write a haiku. I remember seeing a haiku on the internet before, so I decided to give it a try. No. I got a B+, but he wrote back that he was very amused by the poem. Haha. In college teaching English, we read Hills Like White Elephants. Guy says it's about breast implants and gives an impassioned and textually supported defense. I liked his read better than the usual. US history final. Sophomore year. Extra credit question was, what country is Andrew Carnage from? Since I really needed and didn't know, I wrote a foreign one, as his homeland is foreign to the USA. Wouldn't you know it? Boosted my test from a C+ to a B. Love that teacher. I'm an English language arts teacher and have mainly dealt with high school students. We deal with writing, reading, grammar, and vocabulary. Keep in mind, every example I list was from a test and/or assignment I didn't create myself. So maybe the lesson learned is to create your own assignments. Reading. During my student teaching, I had 2 classes of seniors, and they were to read The Great Gatsby. One of the questions on the test said, explain why The Great Gatsby is a great work of literature. One student I had didn't like the book, so his response was that he didn't like the book and didn't think it was a great work of literature. He also said that was an opinion and not a fact. Technically, he was right, so I gave him full credit. It really is an opinion. Writing. This one is similar to above, and whoever made this writing prompt didn't think it out. The assignment was to write a 1-pager. It was for 7th graders, and the topic was to explain a family vacation trip that you love. The poor student wrote that he had never been on a vacation trip, while he could have just lied. I assumed he was honest, and since I didn't want him to make up a bogus trip, I gave him full credit. Vocabulary. When I was student teaching, we would have vocabulary tests, and there were always extra credit questions. One of the extra credit questions asked to use a word in a sentence. The student wrote the word correctly in the sentence, but he wrote it in the most simplistic sense. I can't remember what word it was, but it was something like I like, insert word, ing on days like today. It's not that it was incorrect, it's just that every other student who answered it correctly had unique, interesting, and engaging sentences. Grammar. In a high school class I was teaching, it was a group of freshmen. We were learning about the difference between past tense, present tense, and future tense verbs. We were using a workbook, and one student put the future tense verbs in both the present and future tense boxes and made us nully there is no present, only past or future comment. I gave him credit, but later explained to him that in the grammatical sense, there are present tense verbs, even if that's technically a true statement.